Recently, it was officially confirmed that the variant of Laura Kinney, otherwise known as X-23, is the very same variant that we saw during the events of Logan. But this isn't actually the largest question. Why was this version of X-23 in the void during the events of Deadpool and Wolverine? And how did she ultimately escape in the end? But what exactly did X-23 do after the events of Logan to get pulled off of her timeline and banished into the void? Well, today, let's break it all down, as we believe we have the answer. In the old days of the TVA, the reason why a person could be removed from a timeline were much more strict, often to the detriment of completely innocent people who never willingly or knowingly did anything wrong or breached the timeline. Under the domain of He Who Remains, pruning could be the result of just about anything. Miss Minutes explains in Loki that something as simple as being late to work or other actions that are completely unintentional can result in a splintering timeline. We know, however, that this is no longer true, and that the multiverse is now under the control of Loki. The multiverse is allowed to live and thrive, so just branching from a reality is not enough to get pruned. So now, we have to examine under what circumstances someone would be removed from their timeline and sent into the void. Looking at the new TVA guidelines, what crimes are punishable by pruning in the new version of the TVA? The biggest crime right now is the damage to an entire reality. One does this by jumping between timelines, conquering foreign timelines, or causing incursions. We know this because the TVA is deliberately monitoring variants of Kang in order to ensure that they don't ever become the tyrants that they're known for. But they did not intervene when Doctor Strange jumped into Earth 838 or when Wanda was dreamwalking between realities, so even these crimes don't seem to be serious enough or noticeable enough for the TVA. With that said, what could have possibly happened with X-23? There is the directive of the main TVA bureaucracy and the official directive of the organization. As we learned in Deadpool and Wolverine though, these are not the only factions capable of pruning at their own discretion. The main antagonist, Paradox, is no longer affiliated with the proper pipeline, and instead, Paradox is leading a rogue faction of TVA agents who are intent on mercy-killing dying timelines. So even though they still have thousands of years left to live, he wants to put them out of their misery, and we seemingly get confirmation that they are responsible for the disproportionate number of different prunings. When Deadpool and Wolverine met the rebels, it is stated that they each tried to fight to save their timeline, even though some like Blade didn't get much of a chance. But in attempting to do it, or even thinking about it, this got them banished to the void in order to put down their would-be rebellion. This seems to indicate that X-23 knew that her timeline was dying, and more importantly, that Paradox's approach of recruiting different heroes to the main MCU was not a new idea only related to Deadpool. What if Paradox actually had a long history of pulling characters off of dying timelines and offering them a chance for salvation before murdering their original timeline and world, and Wade was just the latest in a long line? This would mean that Paradox does have a purpose for collecting heroes of value, and that Laura could have been one of the last approaches that he made. But now we have to remedy this with some of the Fox timeline issues and the previous lore. We know that Logan takes place in the year 2029, which should mean that by the time Deadpool takes place, Wolverine should still be alive for a few more years, and Laura should be much younger. But it seems like there's a fairly easy explanation for this. The year is 2029 in the MCU, Earth 616 proper, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the years would line up perfectly across all of time and across all universes. They could easily jump from Earth 10,005 year 2029 to Earth 616 2024. And in the grand scope of the multiverse, this is pretty easy to grasp. What's very interesting though is X-23's age, as she is several years older when she arrived in the Void, which would mean that Paradox would have pulled her from the mid-2030s on her timeline, instead of grabbing her as soon as Logan died, which does make some sense. It's reasonable that Paradox would allow her to mature a bit more before offering her such a difficult choice, which would be the choice to escape her timeline before it died. So jumping a few years into the future is a reasonable move. So then, if this is true, we believe that the timeline went something like this. Wolverine dies in the primary Fox timeline, Earth 10,005, so Paradox has to examine the timeline to see if anyone in this universe is worth saving, before ultimately deciding to mercy kill the entire timeline. First, Paradox looks to Wolverine's clone, and new prodigy in Laura Kinney, who is his primary target. So Paradox's first approach is X-23, though he grabs her from a few years after the death of Logan so that she is more mature and has a more adult capacity to make such a difficult choice, to join with a new reality and watch hers die. Paradox offers her a chance of salvation, as he did to so many other heroes, but just like Gambit, Elektra, and Blade, X-23 refused and rebelled against Paradox's faction. A minor hole though is we don't know exactly when the rest of the heroes were pruned before or after X-23 arrived, and if she got here in between arrivals, but it's likely that Paradox has been involved in this for a very long time, so X-23 would have to fight back, just like Deadpool did in the hopes of saving her reality, but this resulted in her being pruned and sent to the void. We do know that she has been here for a considerable amount of time, enough time to learn the inner workings of Cassandra Nova's operation, learn the politics of the Void, locate and join the resistance movement, and have several stories under her belt. The implication is that at the bare minimum, X-23 has been here for at least several months, which could mean a few things. Option 1 is that she simply arrived in the Void a few months earlier than Wade even did, and were sent to the Void relatively close in time to one another, meaning that X-23's interaction with Paradox could have only taken place a few days ago from Paradox's perspective, but he calibrated the pruning so that the two ended up arriving months apart. Option 2 is that Paradox had some reason to wait this long, whether it was to refine his approach, prepare the Time Ripper, or hide his operation from the mainline TVA, but there are plenty of reasons why this could have been delayed. Either way, it's entirely possible that Paradox was in some way delayed, but the fact remains that he went back to the Fox timeline. In this case, then he may have actually considered Deadpool a backup plan, since he first attempted to save X-23 and seemingly failed. If they had been successful at saving X-23, we don't know for sure if he would have approached Deadpool, or if he would have considered just one survivor to be enough from the timeline. Once he founded his mercy-killing mission, he tried to save heroes like Blade, Gambit, Johnny Storm, and many others with mixed results. It's entirely possible that plenty of the heroes took this offer, and were amicably relocated onto other timelines in order to save them from the imminent collapse of their reality. But this then leaves us to wonder just how many realities Paradox has pruned, especially under the nose of the TVA, and how many heroes he chooses from each reality to save. It also leaves us to wonder what happens in case of incursions, because we understand from the Multiverse of Madness that the longer that someone stays in a foreign timeline, the more unstable that timeline becomes. Eventually, this erodes the barrier between realities until the two collide. So if Paradox's plan was to relocate heroes long term, then why do we know how he was able to do this without causing incursions? One option is something that we've suggested before, which is that 838 Reed Richards was not entirely correct, but that the problem isn't people being on new timelines, it's dreamwalking that's the problem. We know that Earth 838 Strange dreamwalked using the Book of Vishanti, and that by doing so, inadvertently caused an incursion. We also know that Wanda spent a considerable amount of time dreamwalking in the Multiverse of Madness, which again caused another incursion. Think of it this way, if someone jumps into another timeline, then they open a door and then close it behind them. This would cause momentary strain on the barrier, but would otherwise be okay if it is not open for too long. For dreamwalking though, there is a constant maintained connection between two realities, a connection that is eroding the barrier over a long period of time, thus making it riskier and far more likely to cause an incursion. If this is true, then Paradox seems to be able to relocate people fairly freely, and if he can save two people from the Fox timeline, then who's to say that there weren't more before them? How many heroes are now quietly living their lives on a neighboring timeline because they had the realistic perspective to take a better deal from Paradox? But what do you think of this? Do you think that X-23 was actually approached by Paradox, and that with the death of Logan, this prompted her to eventually rebel and be sent to the Void? Did Paradox attempt to save her, thus banishing her? As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on this theory down below, and what future role do you think X-23 will play in the multiverse going forward? As always, my friends, Hulk smash that subscribe button for daily Marvel lore, and have a great day.